now we have this amazing, yes, sorry to do that to these panelists, but we have an amazing group from civil society in our next panel. We've got Hannah Draper, who is the director of Payne and Routledge. We have Cynthia Koo, who is a technology and human rights lawyer at Technos Law. Tamir Israel, down on the end there, the Director of Privacy, Surveillance and Technology Program at the Canadian Civil Liberties Association. Janet Lowe, at the beginning here, Assistant Commissioner, Legal, Regulatory and Stakeholder Affairs at the Commission for Complaints for Telecom Television Services. Dr. Laura Garcia Vargas, who is curator and coordinator of the Pop Down and Beyond at the Edgelands Institute, and Timoleon Ojo, who is the Privacy, Surveillance and Digital Rights Coordinator, also with the Canadian Civil Liberties Association. Welcome, everyone. Can't wait to hear what you have to say.
Thanks, Jane, for the setup. We have a dynamo panel of people who work from a range of civil society organizations and have worked in a number of different civil society organizations over their career. And to set up sort of what we wanted to discuss today, because on our Zoom call, we went in several directions and we could also take a day if we wanted to. Today is about thought leaders in technology and law, and in civil society, thought leaders are also thought provokers. The role of civil society is to call out and ensure transparency and accountability and safeguards. And as technology moves faster and faster, today we're going to talk a little bit about some of the challenges and opportunities that we've faced in the past and how that's going to ramp up over the next 25 years. So, to kick us off, we're going to do a quick round table of everybody up here to do, let's say, a minute and a half, which is a very unfair question to this panel, of your journey from University of Ottawa and the Tech Law program to all of your civil society work, and a highlight from your journey. So I'll kick us off, and I'll probably fail the 1.5 minute thing, but I'll do my best, and then I'll pass it off. We'll go sort of down the line here. So I'm Janet Lowe. I am a U Ottawa grad from 2008. I did the common law, tech law specialization, and I got a taste working at CIPIC, working with Pippa Lawson on privacy law, and that's what piqued my interest in technology law issues. And then I went down this path that I could never have imagined of working with the Public Interest Advocacy Center and telecommunications, working on consumer protection rules in the telecom space and for banks, and found myself in private sector for a little bit. And my highlight has really just been working on telecommunications issues, thinking about consumer protection safeguards that are needed, and in some cases working with a range of civil society groups to fight consolidation, and coming sort of full circle back to my role now at CCTS, where we are code administrators, which means that we help individual consumers and service providers solve problems and administer the rules that are set by the regulator in telecom. So I'm going to pass it down to Hannah to tell us your journey and your highlight.
Thank you so much. I had prepared for a 3-minute intro, and I am prone to ad-libbing, but I will try to keep it short. First, I just want to say an enormous thank you for convening us all here in this space. Just looking around this room, like there are just so many absolute powerhouses and friends and people who have been absolutely influential and formative in my life and career. So thank you for that. So my name is Hannah Draper, and I'm the director of an international digital rights consulting firm called Payne and Routledge, and I graduated from U Ottawa Common Law in 2012. When I came to law school, I wasn't sure exactly what I wanted to do, but I thought having a law degree would be a really good tool in my toolkit to do something about all of the injustices, that we encounter and witness and experience ourselves. So I was really attracted to U Ottawa's focus on social justice. Also, around the time I was considering going to law school, there was this new, I guess it was a website at that time called Facebook. And I had always been really interested in power dynamics in society, and I was increasingly interested in the role that ICTs would have in shaping that. So it was actually, I remember the months I was choosing which law school to go to, and in the months preceding that decision, I read about the student-led complaints PIPEDA complaint against Facebook. And that sort of sealed for me that like U Ottawa was a really cool place and I should go there. And I think it also speaks to what Florian was saying in his introductory remarks about how, the center was cool before, it was cool to be working on these things. So I've spent I've spent all of my career working in digital rights, and most of it particularly working to help organizations and other actors advocate for digital rights in law and policy. So most of my career to date, I spent working for George Soros's Open Society Foundation, running the global portfolio on digital rights, where I had the opportunity to keep working and learning alongside Michael Geist. So that was really nice. I've had the chance to be part of some really, truly remarkable, groundbreaking initiatives. I'm really proud, for example, to have been a part of the discovery of NSO Group's Pegasus being used for political espionage around the world. Citizen Lab, many of you in the room will know them. They were obviously very important in leading that. I've also had the opportunity to contribute to policy developments like GDPR and also the first ever digital rights framework at a national level, Marco Civile in Brazil. I've helped the Colombian government put human rights safeguards and digital IDs for Venezuelan migrants. That was also it was enormously complex, but for a minute, it was rewarding. Obviously, things have changed since then. I've helped journalists in Myanmar and Venezuela stay on during the coup and other state oppression. Also researching COVID apps and privacy violations, which ultimately led to a lawsuit in the UK and a new app with less violations. And lately I've been working on consumer rights in digital public infrastructure, particularly in BRICS countries. And I'm very excited to be starting a new project looking at accountability for those mining cobalt from the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. As you may know, cobalt is very important to lithium batteries for our devices, our electric vehicles, AI infrastructure, but it is decimating, the land and the people that are living there. So we're looking at using Europe's corporate sustainability due diligence directive to hold those actors to account. So thank you again for having me here today.
Thank you. I'm testing. Okay, I'm not sure how I'm going to follow that. My name is Cynthia Koo. I'm the founding and principal lawyer at Technos Law, also a senior fellow at Citizen Lab. And I arrived at U Ottawa for my LLM. And I was one of those annoying students in law school who knew exactly what I wanted to do from day one. And it was the type of law that would appear in a Michael Crichton novel. And that started because I'm from out west, so I did my undergrad at UBC, where I was lucky enough to take an honors English seminar in the rhetoric of science, health, and medicine with Judy Siegel. And that was my introduction to science and tech studies and got me started. Then I did my JD at UVic, where I think my first advocacy fight was convincing the rest of the IP Law Club, where I was the president, to change our name to the IP and IT Law Club, just so we could get with the times. But doing my LLM at U Ottawa was a dream come true because I got to work with tech law luminaries that I'd admired through the internet from the other side of the country since 1L. And it was very intentional because I think I was 3 years into practice already because I knew I wanted legal practice to inform my LLM by the time I did it. I think Marina Pavlovich wrote one of my reference letters for the program. And I knew that I didn't even apply anywhere else, actually. Like, I didn't just want to do any LLM. I wanted to do specifically the public interest, human rights infused tech law LLM at U Ottawa. So how that fit into my journey, I guess, is because I was doing sole practice at the time. I was already in digital rights, but mostly communications law. And felt like I was hitting a wall where I needed to both level up in terms of all the interesting positions seem to have not just the JD, but the PhD, for instance, or already years of experience, and also pivot because the types of issues that seem to be really heating up and where all the interesting questions weren't the type of issues that a client was necessarily going to come to me to. No client was going to come to me and be like, we're going to pay you to solve intermediary liability. And so that's where the LLM came in. In terms of highlights, there are so many files and projects, every one of which was a highlight on its own. But I think the reason that they were a highlight was less about each file in of itself. So, for example, there's two categories I can think of. The first one is working on massive research reports, like the type that I did at Citizen Lab or with Leaf, for example, or working on Supreme Court factums, like with Professor Pavlovich. But what I really loved about them was the nitty gritty of getting to work with like brilliant colleagues and diving into the like, oh, what's this we said on like paragraph 5 of page 87? Like, do we really mean that? Like, what is the issue there? Like that part was really rewarding. And then being able to see how what you brought into existence actually influenced policy or what other people were saying publicly later on. The other highlight I would say actually didn't happen here. It happened during my 2.5 years in Washington, D.C., where I was a senior associate at the Center on Privacy and Technology at Georgetown Law. And that was my first taste of, I think, what now people would call movement lawyering, where it wasn't being a standalone privacy and tech lawyer. I was head of the worker surveillance portfolio, and that really involved working hand in hand with like unions and labor rights activists and labor and employment lawyers, not just other privacy and tech lawyers. And similarly, I led a coalition where we co-drafted a bill to stop algorithmic discrimination in DC at the municipal level with the DC Attorney General's office. And that was also really satisfying because it wasn't just privacy and tech lawyers. We worked with like housing rights groups and socioeconomic justice groups, rallied a bunch of people to the hearing, we did teach-ins, and to be part of that whole process from like the drafting of the bill to the rallying to introduction to the hearing and having that back channel where like you suggest someone should do a talking point and then seeing it happen 2 minutes later on screen and the testimony was really rewarding as well because it really was an all of society, civil society approach to these issues and not just like what the privacy and tech lawyers think.
Hello. Yeah, so my name is Timileyin Ojo, and I work with the Canadian Civil Liberties Association and International Network for Civil Liberties Organization, INCLO. For me, the background was coming up from private practice, from a different jurisdiction, and certain cases that I had to handle at that time was what sparked my interest in this program. And the Center for Law and Tech, IOTA, seems to be the perfect spot for me to proceed to continue in that journey. And when I look back, I believe that was definitely a very good option because coming in, I look at the advantage of coming into the program and what it's done for my career moving forward. And I point to, first of all, the compulsory internship that was required. I had the opportunity of doing that with Gowling, and that was a very good introduction to the system coming into a new space. And that's been very, very useful for what I do now. The next I'd focus on would be the kind of activities that took place, the classes itself, technoprudence, technopolicy, and the conversations that took place, those debates, they become extremely important in today's work because not just within Canada, the CCLA work is focused in Canada, but the international network that I work with deal with civil societies from 17 different jurisdictions. So it's basically the point of having different ideas and understanding different subjects, even on the tech space from different perspectives. And those conversations that we had in those classes were very important foundations to help me understand these subjects from a different light when I have these conversations in the spaces. So these are reasons why I would look back at my journey and I would see how important it was. And when I look at highlights, I'll talk about amongst the submissions, both international and locally, I'll look at a project on facial recognition technology. And that's very important or specific for me because back in the program, we had several debates around such topics. And when we walked through that project, I saw how the conversations that we had in class were very useful in building that project from one perspective. So that's just one point I would mention. And I'm happy to note that I'm done with my highlights because I'm the youngest alumni on the panel. I finished in 2024, so I don't have so much stories to tell more than what I've said. So thank you.
So, hi everyone. First of all, it's amazing to be here and seeing people in person. I've been seeing people in a screen for many, many years now. So it's really great to see most of you in person today. My name is Laura Garcia. I'm originally from Colombia. And I came here after I finished my law degree in Colombia. And I have to say, I came first for the LLM. And I have to say it was a privilege just to hear the type of conversations that they were already having here, where in Colombia was like, I think we're starting to have those conversations 6 years ago, maybe. I'm looking at the other Colombian in the room. So it was really a privilege just to hear how the topic of technology and privacy and technology and society have been already developed here, and talking with mentors and colleagues. I was such inspired that I continued with my PhD here. So for sure, the conversations were great. And if I have to highlight part of that journey was, again, the people, right? So the conversations I had with mentors, with students from LLMs, from PhD, from other faculties, which really kind of push the limits of what you believe at the beginning, right? And kind of really push you to think outside the box and kind of question and go a bit beyond. And that type of thinking, thanks to that type of thinking, I end up in Edgelands Institute, which is where I'm working right now. And it's a pop-up institute, so it's cool. I can tell you more about it after. But it comes back, I think, what Susie said in the panel, and it comes back to the community of people that all of you are not only incredibly intelligent, amazing, and really professional, but you are just people, right? And that community, when we are working in such a tech world, it's easy to forget the people that are behind, not just the technology, but making, all the amazing work that everyone is doing here. So thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Tamir. Thank you for inviting me here today. It's great to see everyone again, and some new people as well. I would say that my journey really began here at the into tech law and policy really began here at the University of Ottawa. I articled at a clinic here, CIPIC, which I think many of you are familiar with, and I came here for what I thought would be a short articling gig, but ended up staying for, I think, a good 14, 15 years, which just speaks to the very dynamic and engaging environment that this university has to offer. I would say I particularly think, just to pick up on things that a number of my colleagues were saying, the ability to work, I think, with such great and thoughtful and strategic people at CIPIC, including my colleague David Fewer, who I was just looking around, but I don't know if he's here at the moment. I think he was here before, who's still at CIPIC, and the amazing faculty here and all the students that we've worked with over the years has been a great opportunity. And I've also, the space that CIPIC and the center provided to do really rigorous and interdisciplinary thinking on a number of these complex technology-related issues from the start is something that I've taken with me throughout my entire journey, I would say, which included, after leaving CIPIC, I've worked on international human rights within an international NGO for a while, and I'm currently at the Canadian Civil Liberties Association with my colleague Timlin. I really have continued to apply that rigorous and interdisciplinary approach that I learned here, and it's been critical to every facet of the advocacy that I've done across all these different organizations. In terms of highlights, I'll do a short one because I think we've gone a bit long. But I would say one of my highlights that I do want to touch on is something that Hannah was talking about. It was a complaint that was actually filed, pulled together and filed by a number of students at CIPIC before I joined the clinic, immediately before I joined the clinic. And I, along with my colleague David and some other students who are still here, including our articling student at the time, who I'm going to call out, All-Line, who's over there, were responsible for shepherding this complaint through the regulatory process. And it was a really meaningful and complex process. It required a lot of strategic thinking, a lot of real deep understanding of both the technological aspects of how Facebook was operating. And, they would keep shifting the way that their platform worked in the middle of the regulatory and complaint, and it wasn't very transparent. So it required a level of technical understanding that I embraced at that time and found to be a really important thing to be willing to do and when doing this type of advocacy, but also understanding, taking a broader interdisciplinary and intersectional approach to understanding how the harms of these shifts are going to impact society more broadly, as well as different segments of society. So the complaint as well was one of the first privacy complaints filed against global social media companies. So it had a significant impact in that regard. It changed the way the company operated globally. But it also, for me, underscored, the need to be very persistent in our advocacy because, a few years later, Facebook was actually before the privacy commissioner again for violating similar principles that had been enforced in our complaint. And that case is now before the Supreme Court of Canada. So it reinforced for me two things. Like, one is the importance of having this very broad, intersectional, interdisciplinary approach when you're doing this type of advocacy. It was also a personal highlight because it did have this very significant shaping of how social media operates with respect to privacy. But also, like, this really emphasized for me the need to be very rigorous and persistent in our advocacy to reinforce these principles, because it's not a one-off sort of thing that you do and you're done and move on to the next thing. These things keep coming back, and you really you need to keep advocating. And that's also the reason why we need very smart people coming through institutions like this who understand the importance of these challenges and are willing to carry on that advocacy. Thanks.
So I don't know if the common law program needs an advertisement, but in case we didn't all get that, I think you can see from this panel that there's a lot of depth, and from the rigor and the training that we got through our various stages here at the University of Ottawa. And really just that practical element is what I think I'm hearing singing through for everybody, is the ability to build skills alongside practitioners, whether it's at CIPIC and clinics that are at the university or working through internships. I know I worked, I did a student internship at the Privacy Commissioner, and it's interesting to see the Facebook complaint come back, because I did some research on that, and then it sounds like Tamir picked it up, and then that was what attracted Hannah to the University of Ottawa. So that's a nice full circle. Let's dive in a little bit more, because I'm hearing lots of different skills that are needed to be effective as civil society. There's a lot of rigorous research. There's advocacy in lots of different forums, parliament, lawmaking, departments, regulators, as well as civic engagement. And so let's talk about the rapid pace of technology, the constraints that I hear facing civil society organizations. I don't think that's news to anybody. Tamir made a really great point about the persistence that is needed in this space to stay on top of it. And so, Hannah, I'm going to invite you, and then Tamir as well, to talk a little bit about some of the societal challenges with the work and the scale. What are the challenges that we're facing as tech lawyers working for the public interest?
Well, there's no shortage of work. I think coming from a digital rights perspective, there's just like an exponential amount of work to do. We're digitizing, all of our interactions, as citizens, as consumers, as individuals. And as has already been mentioned today several times, regulation does not keep up with the rate of innovation. Katie alluded to the avocado earlier, and I think that she was spot on. I think that there is a false correlation with ICTs and progress, modernity, security, efficiency, but that doesn't always hold up. So I think that we have a long way to really go to maybe debunk those things, but also, it's really ridiculous that we are letting go of human rights. Like, we're forgetting human rights. Like, it's human rights. So I think that we will always have a lot of work to do. But I think that it's also really important for us to remember that while everything is being digitized, not everyone has access to digital. And even if there is infrastructure in place, they can be subject to internet shutdowns. We see net neutrality issues. Like, what can people access? Who can access it? And we often see that this falls along, that marginalized communities are disproportionately impacted. So I think that not only do we need to be taking very good care of the digital rights work that we're actually doing, but we also need to be looking very closely at who's being left out, because given the scale and the rapid nature, the power concentrations of digital technologies, we really are exacerbating inequalities around the world. Something else I wanted to mention as a pretty significant challenge is funding. Civil society usually doesn't earn enough, through their work to cover the work that they want to do. There are some models where people do consulting or whatnot, but really civil society is dependent on funders. And that means that you have to have a funder who supports and to a degree agrees with the type of work that you're trying to do. So since the latest administration came into power in the United States, civil society has really been struggling more than I've ever seen previously in my career. There were cuts to U.S. aid, which has had knock-on effects because it makes it much more competitive for other organizations to fundraise from other sources. And then you see things like last week in the United States, the DOJ is now investigating open society foundations where I used to work. They're investigating terrorism or whatever. So you can also really see like a chilling effect due to the politics and the people in power. So those are a few things that are on my mind as we look forward. Thank you.
Tamir, you had some really great thoughts about information asymmetry. You want to share that with us?
Yeah, thanks, Janet. But also, all the challenges that Hannah mentioned around funding and chilling effects are definitely becoming more acute even as time goes on, even as the need for this type of advocacy grows. So just to underscore that. But one sort of pervasive and continuing challenge as well when you're doing tech advocacy in particular is the information asymmetry, because the platforms are complex. It's always the technology is complex, so there's an additional layer where you do need to make an effort to understand the advocacy, the technology, if you're going to be doing effective advocacy in this space, and that adds a layer of complexity. And often, if you're up against, if it's whether it's a company or a government agency on the other side of an advocacy challenge, they are in control of the technology and will have a better ability to understand how it's working on the ground. So that really increases the level of the difficulty really of pushing back when you're doing this type of advocacy. One example of this is a project that I had the benefit of contributing to when I was at Human Rights Watch, which sought to try to understand the way that Facebook was moderating a particular type of content in a particular type of against the backdrop of an international crisis, and that there's not a lot. The platforms are designed, of course, to not make this very easy to do, and there's not a lot of ability to really track how information is being moderated and what information is being circulated to what levels, because this all happens on the platform. The platforms, a lot of it is AI or algorithmically driven, depending on what term you want to use. Overcoming those types of obstacles takes a lot of effort and really creative methodologies. And it also allows the companies to then be like, oh, you are to try to challenge your conclusions by really leaning into the opacity of what they're doing. So I found that to be challenging. And I think that's a cross-cutting challenge across a number of technologies. That's just one example of it. There's also another side, though, to this sort of informational asymmetry or to the technological complexity of doing this type of advocacy, which is that, as Hannah and Cynthia were saying, a lot of the harms that result from technological problems do fall most heavily on vulnerable communities and people who are already marginalized in really significant ways. But then to the degree that it's difficult for people doing tech-related advocacy to really articulate, the law with respect to complex technologies, there's an additional knowledge translation challenge when you're trying to understand how these things are impacting various communities. And I've been fortunate, and particularly in my current role at the Canadian Civil Liberties Association, to really have the opportunity to work with a lot of other groups to understand the way that different technologies are impacting on different communities, and to learn from that. And I think, again, this just goes to underscore what I was saying earlier on, that it's really important to embrace this intersectional approach to advocacy if you're going to be doing tech advocacy in a way that really reflects the most severe harms that technology is leading to.
Great. So we're going to turn to Cynthia and to Millen to talk about credibility. Public support is really a critical part. Public understanding is really a critical part of civil society work being effective. So let's start with Cynthia and what you want to share about credibility.
Sure, thank you. So first, I co-sign all of you're hearing there are very many challenges associated with working in and for civil society. And so in addition to all of the challenges that my amazing co-panelists are noting, I'll be focusing on two in particular. The first one is what I would think of as kind of a latent issue of epistemic injustice, which is the idea of people being wrongfully denied their authority or credibility as holders of knowledge or as experts. And so you see this often when it comes to tech intersecting with human rights issues, with equality and anti-discrimination issues, because I know as someone who was born and raised career-wise in the digital rights world, the fastest way to discredit someone is to say, you don't understand the internet, or you don't understand the tech world. I've said that to people. And so, but which made sense at the time. But then the more and more we see tech issues intersecting with technology-facilitated violence or immigration surveillance, for instance, you have to start asking, why is it that if someone understands tech, that disqualifies them from being able to speak authoritatively on a topic? But if that someone does understand tech but doesn't understand domestic violence, doesn't understand racism or Islamophobia, that doesn't disqualify them from being able to publicly opine with credibility on a topic. And so you see this happening both, I think, with respect to civil society and government or other lawyers, but also within civil society as well, depending on the human rights group that you're talking about and what they focus on. And then another sector that you kind of see that epistemic injustice and inequality is between, I think I don't know if she's in the room, one of the speakers earlier, I want to say Kelly, the sociologist who said that when she was in interdisciplinary rooms, she gets reduced to being just an ethicist. And even though I am a lawyer, called and everything, I've also been through that. So for example, when I was working with a law student in my capacity at the Citizen Lab as a researcher, I think I was maybe third year call at the time, and she asked me, oh, have you ever considered going to law school? I was like, yes, I have, in fact. And so it was just interesting because it's okay, well, you're both things. Or even when I meet, say, other privacy, free expression lawyers, which I've worked on both the things, and I also work on equality. But because the lawyer didn't realize I was both a lawyer and a researcher, or the privacy advocate doesn't realize I've done privacy and free expression and equality. It's like they take the one thing that's different between you and then reduce you and your expertise to just that thing, as opposed to recognize, like, no, you've actually covered all the bases. And then that impacts who's taken seriously on different tech and human rights issues. And so the second challenge that results from that is that if, for instance, as a movement lawyer or community-based lawyer, you take that issue of epistemic injustice seriously and want to rectify it and make sure that the workers are at the table, the victims and survivors of intimate partner violence are at the table, then you do end up having an additional layer of difficulty to your work, because you want to approach those communities in a way that builds trust and that shows you can be relied on and you're coming to them for the right reasons, not through like an extractive or exploitative way. And that takes time. Like, I think I spent a year at Georgetown only meeting with different labor groups before I even tried to propose a project, just to make sure that it would actually serve their needs. And so there is kind of this built-in barrier as a necessary part of doing the work right.
Yeah, so in addition to infrastructure and as well as the lack of technical understanding by civil society advocates, one other point that's very important is the public itself. So there's the challenge of passing on the kind of work we do and why it's important to the public. I've been in rooms where I had to be explaining why a very basic subject. I know this would not be so much of an issue to people in this room, but trust me, outside this room, it's so much work. Especially in a setting where some tools are being brought up or laws are being put in place and targeted at or communicated by either the government or the industry as targeting crime, for example, or to deal with certain pressing issues in the society. It's become so much workload on civil society advocates to communicate to the public on why those issues are very important. A very practical example is what I meant, one tool I mentioned earlier on, facial recognition technology. Where it's generally been communicated as the tool being used to fight crime in the society. And so a very regular person out there in the public wants to be safe and believes, come on, everyone should use this tool and the criminal should be gotten. But the underlying issues that are attached to the use of the facial recognition technologies is something else that it's become so much work for civil society advocates to communicate those issues to the public. And therefore, at times, we lose the public support in what we get to do, because it just seems like these people are there again to be a clog in the wheel of progress of the government. They're just noisemakers, just speaking about the things that we really don't know how many people. And all of those issues keeps going. So that's one that I think is very important. A lot of times outside the advocates training themselves to understand how these tools work, it now falls down again to explain to the public why it's definitely an issue and why they should be concerned about it. The second one I would mention is now within, and that's among civil societies. By virtue of what I do and the relationships I form, you'd observe at the end of the day that even within civil society, not everyone prioritizes the same issues or believes certain problems are actually issues. So at the end of the day, we are fighting meant to be jointly, but in some instances, we're fighting against each other on some other issues because we have different values around that. So again, this brings back the question of values that was brought up in the first panel, and I think I would stop at that for now.
Thanks, Timilan. Okay, so that was a little doom and gloom. There's a lot of challenges facing civil society, structural, funding, pulled in many, many, many directions, big, powerful technology companies. And I am, this today is about the past 25 years and where we're going on the next 25 years. Hannah and I were joking this morning that it's really hard to imagine 25 years ahead because things are moving so quickly and the pace is compounding all of these structural challenges. So we're going to try to move to an optimistic note in the next 10, 15 minutes. What are the priorities for achieving robust, resilient, dynamic, vibrant civil society to ensure that we can continue to hold to account and call in for transparency where on these really important technology and society issues? So we'll start with Laura. I'm really interested to hear what you have to say, especially about art. So we'll start there.
I mean, I think we need to be positive, right? And all the challenges that have been pointed out by the rest of the panelists are still there, and I think they will continue to be there unless we kind of tackle them one by one as what they are. But I think at the same time, you can turn all of those challenges into the ways of moving forward, right? So I think I agree that there's a problem right now that civil society is fighting each other for funding, right? And it's a reality. But I think it's also the type of work that we do in digital, law and technology, law and society, and technology and society, they all intersect with each other, right? So it's kind of bringing together all these different efforts towards, just kind of trying to stop pulling us apart and trying to bring each other together. The other big challenge is, again, as they all mentioned, is how do we tell people that they should care, right? Because at the end, that's the big question. And I think we need to start being more creative of how we interact with people. First, it's about talking with people and asking, hey, like, do you know, like, you use this technology, and what do you think about are the challenges of this technology, right? Maybe a lot of the people don't understand what we in this room understand about the challenges, but are more the practical ways. But it's also about other mediums about how we communicate. So reports are useful. They're awesome. I love reading reports. I love writing reports. But no one reads reports beside the people that are already interested on that topic. And that's where art comes to play. So just a brief intro of what Edgelands does. And Edgelands is a pop-up institute that brings together academic work, arts, and spaces of conversation. And I have to say, it has been amazing to see how this works in real life, right? Being able to, art is a moving force that allows you to bring into a room people that have different backgrounds, different way of thinking, and that might not be interested in the topic at the first time, and then through different approaches, kind of making them try to think, right? Because at the end, it's not saying this is the answer and everyone should be saying we need this type of solution, but it's just inviting to think, well, maybe you should be asking questions, right? And what type of questions we should be asking together. So to summarize and to also hear, I'm really curious to hear from the rest of the panelists and from the public, I think it's about reinventing ourselves, right? It's about imagining how can we move forward with what we have, but also how can we bring other disciplines, other ways of knowledge and of communication to the conversation.
Perfect. I'm going to call on Cynthia next. I think you had to sort of talk about how we can pull together and build some solidarity in this space too.
Sure, thank you. I was about to say, I'm not sure how optimistic or positive my recommendations will sound, but I do think they're part of the way forward. So the first one is, I think civil society is going to have a really hard time, especially with the way the world is going now, if we don't expand our conceptualization of who is actually posing a threat to our human rights and civil liberties. So a long time ago, like 2009 or earlier, Ian Kerr, who I was fortunate enough to have for a short while as my LM co-supervisor along with Jane Bailey, wrote about the idea of information fiduciaries, tech companies and information fiduciaries, pointing to the fact that they might have a greater role and greater obligations than your run-of-the-mill business. And then years later, Jack Balkin wrote a paper called Free Speech is a Triangle, pointing out that we can no longer look at the typical government-person relationship to look at free speech issues, but we have to look at this third party now, private tech companies that mediate our speech. And I think in Aaron Bykowitz, the Supreme Court of Canada, had some amazing language in there that basically acknowledged, I would say, that privacy is now a triangle. Like they talked about the tripartite relationship between the government, private companies, and the individual. And so I think as civil society, we really have to get away from the fact that, like, you know, big bad government, individual poor innocent user, because that's not the model anymore. It's more complex, and private power, as we are seeing in the United States, is increasingly merging with state power, such as to almost be one and the same in some cases, depending what you're talking about. So I think the sooner we all recognize that and pull together, where it's like, it's not just corporations, because I feel like depending on your background, you're either more scared of private power or more scared of public power, but honestly, it's both. And so the more we can pull together and put together a united front on that, I think the more effective we'll be at fighting the rise of fascist forces, frankly. And so that's the first thing. The second thing is that as part of that, I think there has to be more intersectional solidarity from digital rights, tech privacy lawyers towards the equity-seeking, equity-denied groups that are most impacted. And as an example, I saw an op-ed came out a few days ago or a few weeks ago that said something like, why feminists must defend encryption. And I saw that and read it, and I agreed, as one such feminist tech lawyer who has been defending encryption to the extent it's been part of my career. But I actually think it's the other way around. It's maybe if encryption advocates had spent more of the past 10 years defending feminism and abortion rights and anti-racism, we might not be like where the world is today. So it has to be a two-way street. And I think especially in Canada, so, LEAF has a tech rights committee, and a lot of the equity-seeking groups, non-tech equality groups, have been coming on board because they have to, because they're the impacted ones. And I really think it's our obligation as tech and privacy lawyers to question, like when I was in Georgetown, for instance, I had almost a professional identity crisis. Like, was Judge Easterbrook right? Like, what does it mean to be a privacy and tech lawyer saying, I'm going to help you workers, but I don't know labor law, or I'm going to help you immigrants protect your privacy, but I don't know immigration law. So I think that more expansive sense of interdisciplinarity and solidarity as well is part of the necessary way forward.
All right, Tamir. You had some really interesting ideas about toolkits, and I'm particularly interested for you to share how that applies now with the pace of change, and do we have to reimagine these toolkits every time there's a new technology? What toolkits do we need to help move us forward?
Yeah, that's a difficult question, and I don't know if I'm going to be as optimistic as your prompt was hoping for, your initial prompt. I think we need to, there's a few things. Some of them are, I think there's a legal toolkit component where we need to, there's been maybe like a historically grounded series of safeguards that have allowed for civil society to do its work. And I think these are no longer up to the task, like the chilling effects. We're seeing it in the US. It's probably like very prominent in the US, but also in a number of other jurisdictions around the world. And that civil society is really under threat in ways that it hasn't been for a long time. You have Open Society Foundation is on the cusp of potentially being listed as a terrorist organization in the US, which would have a global implication for Canada as well as other countries, because it funds a lot of civil society work all over the world. And while I think Canada has been to some degree shielded from this evolution, I don't think we're immune from it. So it's something that we should start to get in front of maybe, and start to think about how we embed more robust legal safeguards for the type of work that civil society needs to do its job. The specifics of that are complex, and I think we're just starting to look at the details of what that might look like. But then beyond that, I think there's also a discourse toolkit challenge, a need for an evolved discourse toolkit, which I think many of my colleagues have already touched on, which is that we do need to, I think, often we take for granted maybe that there is a public understanding of some of the importance of the broader importance of some human rights and civil liberties. I think that's being challenged right now as well with the way that public discourse in general is going. So I think we need to take a step back and really explain at a more fundamental level to people what human rights and civil liberties and these other important critical historical safeguards that we've had, what they do in society, why they're important, and then again, as I've said over and over today, there is a really complex technological aspect to this where you have to then explain what does that mean in certain in certain technological contexts, what is the impact of this going to be for different people? I think we really need to evolve our ability to talk about these things and really go back to first principles and explaining to the general public, why this is important in ways that we haven't had to do in a while. So I don't know if that's helpful, or optimistic at all, but.
Thanks, Tamir. So we did get our 15-minute warning a couple minutes ago. So if there are any questions, please feel free to make your way to the mics. But while we're waiting for our first question, I thought I'd toss out at Hannah. The next 25 years, your work is very international. And international has come up a lot as a trend. There are a lot of things moving quickly internationally. We can't lose sight of them domestically. What are the opportunities for us to stay on top of internationalization, and how do we leverage that while we're pressured for all those reasons we've been discussing?
I think, from my experience, I think it might be important to recognize that the West doesn't have a monopoly on the moral authority. Some of the work that I've been doing researching in BRICS countries has been really interesting. We actually see oftentimes like a lot more consumer-centric approaches, like in terms of cybersecurity, for example. So I guess, and also picking up on things that others have said is like, I think we need to look to others. I think we really need to learn from others, not just the usual suspects and not just interdisciplinarily, but like, internationally as well. And I think picking up on something that Cynthia said, who we're speaking to, or like, as a former funder, I can say like, who gets funded to work on these issues. Like, you usually have to have a certain degree of like affluence, privilege, and access, even just to be able to work on access. Like if you can't, travel internationally and meet somebody at, a conference, or if you don't speak English, or I mean, if you are marginalized communities, like there's a lot of things stacked up against you to be heard, and yet we need to hear from you the most. Also, in a lot of international policy debates, people really look to Europe especially, but it's, they are not. I mean, okay, what are some examples? Like, I really just think we need to be looking to the rest of the world. Like, okay, South Africa, they were the first ones where the Supreme Court said that mass bulk surveillance was illegal. Or Mexico was the first to make a law that required transparency on the import of espionage spyware. So I just think that we need to look to each other. Yeah, thank you.
All right, so we'll go to this mic here for a question.
Hi, it's Kim McPhail again. I'm an economist, just to remind people I don't know the law stuff. My question is that in the first panel, we heard a lot about benefits of tech for particular groups: children, women in shelters, women in refugee camps, Ottawa tech firms that are doing, sort of on the other side of things, tech for ICE. And the question that comes to my mind is I think of two other sort of marginalized group. I think of people with disabilities, and I think of seniors. And I think that those two groups are some of the ones who can benefit the most from tech, but they are some of the groups who can be hurt the most from tech, and some of the groups where it's hardest to detect the hurt that is happening. So I just wondered about that, and as a sort of extension of that, I wondered why the focus is on tech for a particular group rather than just how it can benefit people across the board, and whether there are particular, I don't know what word to use, you might even say accommodations to be made for particular demographic groups or something. So the question is, who's being left out? And is it exacerbating inequalities? I think one of you mentioned that, and I'm wondering about that with those particular groups. So I look around this room, and I don't see anybody in a wheelchair, and I don't see anybody with a seeing eye dog. And as far as seniors, I think I'm the oldest person in the room, and I don't think I see anybody else who's as old as me. So those are my questions.
Anybody on the panel want to take that? There are groups, and I used to work for the Public Interest Advocacy Center. I see John Lawford over there, who do represent people who are vulnerable, work closely with seniors group. Public Interest Advocacy Center is in a really precarious place right now. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that there are real structural funding issues that are challenging their ability to do effective advocacy in this space. It's a bigger structural problem. But I think, they looking at technology through the lens of more vulnerable people that they serve, and ensuring that their rights are advocated for and considered, while we're also thinking about how it impacts everybody, is really a critical piece, and also why this work is so challenging and complex. I know, Tamir, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, just to say that, I think that's absolutely right. And people with disabilities and the elderly are among those most heavily impacted groups that could be most negatively impacted by various technological harms. At Human Rights Watch, we have a disability and human rights unit that does a lot of this work, and the tech team works closely with them. And at the Canadian Civil Liberties Association, where I am now as well, we have an equality program that does look into a lot of these, and we are often working with them as well as trying to work, reaching out to, and then the last aspect of this is that we, there's an educational component of this of explaining to people, seniors and other people who are facing disabilities, to better understand what their rights are in these situations and when they're navigating technological challenges. And I think that's also something that we could be doing a lot more of. But yeah.
I think when we get to later this afternoon, we're going to talk more, I think, about private sector. And I think there is a question on how private sector engages also with these groups directly to understand their needs and be able to meet them, and not just ask them for their expertise, but support their providing that expertise into the private sector as well. There's sort of a corporate social responsibility component there. I know I just got assigned to wrap up. But we'll take one more question, and then we'll wrap up after that.
Great. Thanks very much. I'll try and be brief. My name is Robert Young. I'm a proud U Ottawa law grad, but my graduation was before this center was launched. So it goes back sometimes. So to the previous speaker, she may not be the oldest person in the room. I lead a team of really talented lawyers at Global Affairs Canada in the International Law Bureau, where we advise. Here's the context. 10 years ago, I was the first lawyer hired to work full-time on cyber and tech and digital issues. Now there are 9 or 10 of us who work on it substantially or full-time. This includes cyber threats, digital threats, hybrid threats, cyber crime, ransomware, AI, online rights, data governance, most recently data sovereignty, which I think is at least 7 different meanings, and probably there are more. So if you go down the road to 125 Sussex, the view is challenging. I know it is for civil society, and this is a great panel. Thank you for that. It's challenging for governments as well. It's challenging because, first of all, I think it's all been said, massive, rapid change because of technology. Secondly, massive, rapid impacts, often unintended, often unacknowledged, often not well understood. But then thirdly, and this is where I want to benefit from the panel, what's glaring is the lack of consensus globally about how to regulate or manage, I'll say manage, all of this technological change on the global stage. There are fierce fights at the UN, at different regional organizations where we engage. There are fierce fights about how best to manage through rules, through treaties, through soft law, through voluntary norms, through self-regulating activities, all of these things. We get lots of advice from government, but it's not always easy to unpack it. And we often don't have the resources that big tech have. We're better off than civil society often, but for governments today, it's a real challenge to contest or challenge or even engage with big tech. So my question, I think, for the panel is, of course, that Canada consistently champions across all these spaces multi-stakeholder engagement. That's sort of a mantra for us. I hope you feel it. I hope you experience it. We could probably do more, but we say that's a priority, and I think we try and live it. But the challenge for us, or I'd like to ask you, is what should be the focus of the Government of Canada for the next 5 years to approach the management and governance of all this technological change? I think you have 1 minute to answer. But I'll just mention two of my colleagues are here with me and are staying as well for lunch, Eva Van Blockland and Jenna Chitani. So please talk to us at lunch and help us answer the question because we need your advice. Thanks.
Anyone want to take that in 30 seconds? It's a big question.
I will say that too often the solution that gets advanced, and this is not Robert, not from your shop, so don't take this as a personal. Hi, I think part of the problem that there's a lack of consensus is that often the solutions presented are often taken from a particular lens, which is a very like public safety focused lens, and public safety is important, but I think one of the challenges in these multi-stakeholder contexts is that civil society and human rights voices are actually probably weakest in that context and have the hardest time to actually get fully incorporated into the outcomes of these processes. So, the solution is often presented as more surveillance or more government-focused controls, and that's. I think we need to find new ways of making sure that the human rights implications are not just are actually concretely incorporated into the solutions, and then it'll be easier to get to consensus rather than policies being adopted and then get challenged in court, et cetera. Yeah. I don't know if that's helpful.
By design is what I heard there. Cynthia.
Okay, I'll try to make this fast. I think if I could say one thing to focus on is less substance, but more process, because so often, and especially we're seeing now, not to bring things too close to home, but with the Ministry of AI, they're really pushing hard and fast into an area of tech that we haven't really even had the conversation yet of should we be further having the conversation of how and how fast. And we have overwhelming proof at this point that move fast and break things doesn't work. Very bad things happen, but they're still trying that. People will get broken, and so with this first is a 1 month consultation with like under-resourced, understaffed civil society groups. It's not a fair fight, and so to the extent that you can fight against that and make sure the right voices are in the room, I think that will go a long way.
Great. And I'm just going to say, please keep asking that question because, there is a lot of expertise out there. There is a lot of lived experience, and often people are dying to share that, but they don't know to whom to share it. They don't have the resources to, or they don't have the resources to have continue ongoing, conversations through fraught policy processes. So I would just say, please keep asking that question. Thank you.
I see Florian giving us the hook. So please join me in thanking this panel for their energy, passion, vision, and courage.